Good afternoon.
So I'm the manager for the...
I hope that everyone has had a fantastic day so far, and I hope that this session will be the cherry on the sundae of what you guys have done today. It's actually been such a fantastic day. So many good conversations, so many interesting people. My name is Ryan Coe, and I am the director of the New York Office of Public and International Affairs for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You have felt the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints influence today, right? But this is not going to be about me, but about these fabulous people that I work with at the United Nations. As the director of the office, I am the church's main representative to the United Nations. I've been encumbering this position for about a decade. And have had so many wonderful relationships, so many wonderful contacts, so many wonderful people that I've worked with, and I wanted to bring all my friends here to talk to you. As kind of a little bit of an introduction, a lot of people don't understand why we engage with the United Nations, not just from my faith, but from a lot of other faiths, right? They view the United Nations as just a bunch of talk, as the United Nations doesn't really get anything done, etc. And so for a comparison, I want to bring up The Devil Wears Prada. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie The Devil Wears Prada. They're coming out with a sequel soon. We're all excited about that. But as part of The Devil Wears Prada, you have this young ingenue that works for this fashion magazine, but the young woman doesn't really know a lot about the fashion industry. And they're putting together a spread for the magazine, and they need to pick a belt. They hold up two belts. They say, I don't know, these belts look so different. They look exactly the same. And this young ingenue laughs, played by Anne Hathaway. And she gets a little bit reprimanded. Miranda Priestley, the editor of the magazine, says, okay, so the ingenue says, I don't know a lot about this stuff. And Miranda Priestley says, this stuff? She says, okay, I see. You think this has nothing to do with you. You go to your closet and you select, I don't know, that lumpy blue sweater you're wearing, because you're trying to tell the world that you take yourself too seriously to care about what you put on your back. But what you don't know is that that sweater is not just blue, it's not turquoise, it's not lapis, it's actually cerulean. And you're also blithely unaware of the fact that in 2002, Oscar de la Renta did a collection of cerulean gowns, and then it was Yves Saint Laurent who showed cerulean military jackets. And then cerulean quickly showed up in the collections of 8 different designers. Then it filtered down through the department stores and then trickled on down into some tragic casual corner where you no doubt fished it out of some clearance bin. However, that blue represents millions of dollars and countless jobs, and it's sort of comical how you think you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry when in fact you're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff. In much the same way, the UN functions. Okay? There are conversations that happen over there on First Avenue, and those conversations lead to national legislation. They lead to resolutions, which lead to national legislative efforts, which lead to local legislative efforts. Things happen in our communities, and we're blithely unaware of the fact that these initiatives started at the United Nations from a bunch of talk. And that talk is important, and it's important to be in that space and to try to influence the talk. And so we have some of the best talkers that I know that are here to speak with us today. So let me just quickly introduce them. We do have a hard stop at 4:30, just in case anybody has to catch a train or something. I will keep to that. I'll just go down from my left. So Mr. Felipe Capo is on the left. He began his United Nations career at the NGO Relations and Advocacy section of the Department of Global Communications in 2008. He currently serves as the communication officer responsible for outreach, engagement, and global communications with civil society within DGC. And he is, most importantly, the focal point for faith-based organizations within DGC. In this capacity, he leads the team that organizes the Focus on Faith briefings. He studies the links between faith traditions, religious organizations, and the work and the mission of the United Nations. To his right, we have Dr. Kiki Didigu, who works for the UN FPA, which is the UN Population Fund. I don't know why they switched the letters in the acronym, but they do. Perhaps someday we can shed the light on that. But Dr. Kiki is a physician and international development professional with expertise in areas of sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals, global health, population, sexual and reproductive health and gender, climate change, the list goes on. She's currently leading UNFPA's engagement in the Decade of Action and SDG acceleration in coordination and with other UN agencies on partners on issues of global health, population dynamics, gender equality, climate change, and sustainable development. Within the United Nations, there's an organization called the Interagency Task Force on Religion and Sustainable Development. Both Felipe and Dr. Kiki sit on that task force, and Dr. Kiki is one of the co-chairs of that task force. To my immediate left, we have Scott Stearman. For 3 decades, Scott has served as a pastor in the Baptist tradition. His experience includes congregations in Athens, Greece, and in Paris. Most recently has been pastor in New York City, where he also represents the Baptist Global Body at the United Nations, supported by the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship and the Baptist World Alliance. And he is active in helping to lead NGO committees related to human rights and the freedom of religion and belief. He's actually the president of the NGO Committee on Freedom of Religion or Belief at the United Nations. To my right, sorry, Ivy sent me an updated bio, so we have to pull it out. We have Ivy Cook, who is the representative to the United Nations for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment for Soka Gakkai International. And then she has been working in this space for as long as I've been working in this space. We've known each other for years. She's engaged in Soka Gakkai's international work in gender justice, sustainability, and climate change, peace, disarmament, and human rights, mainly through its non-formal education approach since joining Soka Gakkai in 2013. She is the former co-chair of the UN committee on the the UN NGO committee on the status of women, where she served very admirably for 2 years and served to advance women's rights around the world. And then finally, I have all these different pieces of paper, and I apologize. We have Ifat Barak-Cheney, who's the Director of International Affairs at the World Jewish Congress and the Executive Director of the World Jewish Congress Institute for Technology and Human Rights. Ifat is an international lawyer specializing in human rights and technology policy. Her work involves engagement with governments, international organizations, civil society, and technology companies on issues such as hate speech and anti-Semitism online, Holocaust denial and distortion, and the use of technology for education and remembrance. The Interagency Task Force on Religion and Sustainable Development has what's called the Multi-Faith Advisory Council to that task force. The full name is the Multi-Faith Advisory Council to the United Nations Interagency Task Force on Religion and Sustainable Development. I almost can do it in one breath, but just like we have one of the co-chairs for the IATF here, we have 2 of the co-chairs for the Multi-Faith Advisory Council in both Ms. Ivy Cook and Ms. Ifat Barak-Cheney. All right, so that's who these esteemed panelists are. And we just really kind of want to more have a conversation and kind of, there's some of you that I know have been active in the UN space for a long time, but there's many that have not. And so it's going to be a little bit of a one-on-one, a little bit of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish at the UN. And so we're just going to have a little conversation. I'm going to start with my first question to our UN staff here. Many people of faith might not realize that the UN has ongoing engagement with religious organizations. So from your perspectives, why is it important for faith voices to be part of the discussions, part of this talk? At the UN on issues like poverty, migration, peace building, and sustainability.
Ladies first. No, ladies first.
Ladies first, I think Felipe is saying.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ryan. Good afternoon, everyone. We don't have anyone online, right? We're all in the room.
I think so.
Okay, wonderful. Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here. My name is Nkiruka Judegu. Everyone knows me as Kiki or Dr. Kiki, whichever is fine. When Ryan reached out, I had no choice but to comply. He's a great collaborator of ours at the Interagency Task Force as a member of the MFAC, as we call it, the Multi-Faith Advisory Council. And the question, why do we need faith actors, faith voices at the UN? I mean, look around you at the world today. I think the answer is pretty obvious. If we didn't need them before, if we didn't need you before, we absolutely need you now. I'm going to just take us back to why the UN exists. The UN was founded shortly after the Second World War to prevent a third, right? And we've never been closer to a third world war than we are right now. So the situation is very dire. And of all of the different groups of partners that we engage with at the UN, there is something really unique about the faith community, right? A number of things, right? That prophetic voice, the moral leadership, the true connection to people and the most intimate parts of people's lives, the ability to, advise and counsel and guide and foster harmony among communities is something that's really unique to the faith community, and is something that, dare I say, is quite lacking in diplomatic settings and in a lot of the dialogues that we have across the street on First Avenue. And so if we didn't need faith actors before, we absolutely need them now. The UN works in various ways. We work on peacekeeping, we work on human rights, we work on sustainable development. And if you look at the UN Charter, which is sort of our founding document, or you look at the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, a lot of the core principles and values in those texts actually derive from a lot of your faith traditions. Issues around human dignity, around non-discrimination, respect for your fellow man, ensuring that human rights are upheld and the basic needs of individuals are met. A lot of these things actually derive from a range of interfaith traditions, and they found their way into the UN Charter, into the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And so there is already an inbuilt alignment between the mission, the core mission of the UN, and the goals of a lot of the faith actors and the faith traditions across the globe. Now, Ryan's analogy with the devil wears Prada, I don't know how many of you were lost at the beginning. I am familiar with fashion and the UN, so I was already thinking it's the blue sweater, it has to be the blue, and he went for it. So he did an excellent job of explaining how conversations that might seem somewhat irrelevant or even esoteric happening across the street actually have real implications in the lives of every one of us, and in particular in the lives of those that are most vulnerable, most disadvantaged, far away in different parts of the world. I'm with the United Nations Population Fund, so we are a specialized agency, meaning that we have a core mandate. And with the second question, I'll speak a bit more to what we do, which is a lot around gender equality, the rights of women and young people, ensuring that women can give birth safely, and things like that. So we operate both in the normative spaces, but we also operate programmatically on the ground. And we have a very long history of collaborating with faith actors, faith leaders, religious institutions and organizations in service delivery, in outreach to the community, in advocating for the rights of young women, of young girls, preventing teenage pregnancy. A lot of the issues that we work with, our co-partners on the ground are actually faith leaders. And so without collaboration with faith leaders, we would not be able to get our work done on the ground, and this also trickles up all the way to the normative spaces in the UN. So I hope that gives a sense of, at least from our perspective, why this collaboration is so critical. I will also add that we have something called the Interfaith Harmony Week, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. So that's a nice jumping off point. First week of February every year, it's a week where we encourage all of the faith traditions to advocate for interfaith harmony and dialogue across the different spaces. And we have a series of events that take place at the UN. But not only that, throughout the calendar year, there are multiple moments where we can hold hands and collaborate. And like I said, this is not, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goals, which is sort of the broad global development framework we work under. These are not things we can achieve on our own as the UN. Without strong collaboration with you all and with your communities, there's no hope of achieving those goals. So it's an essential collaboration, which, aside from my fondness for Ryan, is the reason why I jumped at the opportunity to come and speak to you today. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you, Kiki.
What she said. Because, I mean, you made it very simple for me. I think that it's naive to think that the UN can do it alone. I mean, it's naive to think that the UN can service 8 billion plus people on this planet, being how many, 100,000 of us working for the Secretariat plus the agencies. This is a collaborative effort, as Kiki said, and I think that it is understanding that there's plenty to learn from faith traditions that have been doing the work that the UN has been trying to do for 80 years. We turn 80 on the 24th of this month. Faith traditions have been doing this for thousands of years. There's a humility that is needed at the UN to understand that we can learn from others, that we have to learn from those who have a commitment to do good and service, and that is at the core of what we are. We are not diplomats, we are not officials, we are international civil servants. And the core of our mandate is service. And I think that faith traditions have been doing service so well for so long that there's plenty to engage with. And I will just use another, let me give you an example. I think that Ryan has heard before, and I'm sorry for that, but how many of you have one of these? To tell you how important the UN is, right? How do these work? What do you need in outer space for this to work, for a smartphone to work? A network with, what do we place on space? Satellites. Who determines the orbits of the satellites and the frequency of communication of satellites globally? ITU. NASA or the FAA? Have you heard of ITU, the International Telecommunications Union of the United Nations? They're the entity responsible for convening the global community and deciding where the satellites need to be placed and the frequency of communications. How many of you have flown on an airplane or have traveled abroad with a passport? Who determines the safety of airplanes, the routes that are taken, the measures in case of emergency, the biometrics in your passports? A clue. Someone related to the UN. Have you heard of ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization of the United Nations in Montreal, Canada? Is the entity of the UN that convenes member states and brings them together to discuss these matters and then make decisions. So your lives, when you, your children, grandchildren are completely focused on TikTok and Instagram, you can blame the UN for facilitating the network for that to happen. Or you can help, we can facilitate also communication for good things. But next time you fly, think that there's a lot of work that is happening behind the scenes that many people are not aware of. We want everyone to know about these things. Who better to engage with than faith traditions who can already have the trust of the community to explain why the UN is important? Because I can explain to my neighbors in Harlem, where I live, why is the UN important to them? Through ILO, the International Labor Organization of the United Nations, with labor rights and laws, and that have trickled down from resolutions to policies and laws. But we need of everyone. And who always has the ear and the trust of the people is mostly faith-based organizations. So it's an essential and natural, as Kiki said, partner for the UN to engage with those who already care for the people, but also who align with what we want to do, which is a better planet for everyone. So it's a natural combination.
Thank you. So I want to go back to something that Felipe said. He said it's silly, basically, to think that the United Nations can do it alone. When I started my advocacy work, one of my mentors said to me, Ryan, you need to know when to sing a solo and when to sing as part of a choir. And through my time working with the United Nations, I've learned that it's almost always part of a choir. Like, it's kind of futile to try to sing a solo at the United Nations. So turning to my right then for Ivy and Ifat, how have you emphasized cooperating and coordinating with other groups and with faith actors at the United Nations when it comes to your advocacy? And what lessons have you seen from some of your more successful partnerships?
Yes. So thank you for the question. And I realized something today for the first time. So in my bio, I talk about Soka Gakkai International, and I thought, and I'm among faith traditions here, but I don't think you know, most of you probably don't know what faith tradition that is. I never put it in my bio. It's the first I'm realizing in 12 years. So it's a Buddhist. And so I realized something. I'm going to make an edit there. But yes, I definitely think, at the United Nations, since the start of SGI's work, we have always worked in collaboration with other NGOs, other faith organizations as well. There's definitely power in numbers. And of course, each NGO has its strengths and its priorities, but it seems like when we can align around a shared cause, it definitely is listened to more because there's a louder voice saying it at the UN. And so definitely for advocacy, I've worked for many years in an NGO committee. Ryan had introduced that, the Committee on the Status of Women. And it's actually the largest NGO committee at the UN, and it partners with UN Women on all matters of women and girls, human rights issues concerning women and girls at the UN. And I would say that, and that's a coalition of sorts of hundreds of, and actually tens of thousands as of COVID. We have, there's a long listserv of those who are collaborating together. But I believe that it's, yes, it's definitely in joining together around a shared cause. And I'm trying to think, I was thinking about, a good example. And so, and then faith as well, but the NGO committee, just because, like I said, it's the largest NGO committee at the UN. And I think in New York, in September, we just had a couple of weeks ago, the General Assembly. That's the largest gathering, basically, of course, heads of states are here, but also all other people related to UN come together. But the second largest convening is the Commission on the Status of Women. And so as far as participation. And I think that because of that, the convening power of the committee, we have been invited to advise various different kinds of groups, like the President of the General Assembly or the other, without going into technical, because then it just gets lost. So I'm not going to go into all of that. But let me just say, like in advisory roles. And I don't think that if I was a solo NGO or I came solo SGI, would I get the attention of those in senior management of the United Nations. And so and also it's a collective voice. So they I think I made my point.
Okay. Good. Ifat.
Thank you. And I want to start with thank you, Ryan, and also condolences to you and your faith for these past few weeks have been hard, both in the passing of your president and also with the horrendous attacks. And maybe that's where I start, that, even last week in an attack on a synagogue in Manchester, the first to come to, as you said, to pray together, to condolence, to stand together are the other faith communities. I've noticed that in almost 11 years with the World Jewish Congress. And I'll start with saying, this is not where I thought I'd be. I did not think I would be involved in interfaith collaboration at the UN when I started the UN International Portfolio at the World Jewish Congress, even though I came from some background with the UN in the past. And I started when I started going to all kinds of forums and meetings, events at the UN to kind of see who's there, what are the topics. And what I realized is the people who are always there on the issues that are of interest to me and who speak about the issues and who work on these issues are the faith-based communities. They were always there many different faiths and actors. They were always active and they were always positive about the topics and about the involvement. And that really brought me into working more with other faith-based organizations. That brought me into the Multi-Faith Advisory Council and to this work, because I saw that in the places that I cared about, in the places that, you know, the topics were of interest, they were always there. And I saw, as you say, the power in numbers, but also in the people who came and the people and the work that is done, and the attitude that is brought was what I wanted to be involved in and what I wanted to work with. And so that really brought me into working with other faith-based organizations, realizing also that the topics are global. Like the topics that we work on, even if I work as a representative of the Jewish communities on anti-Semitism, I'm not working just, you know, only on the topic of anti-Semitism. It influences everybody else's safety, combating extremism, promoting human rights, promoting religion, freedom of religion and belief. It connects to everything and to everybody around us. And so it didn't make sense to just work on my own on these topics or on our own as an organization. It makes sense to work with everybody who's influenced by this and working on this. So I really realize that our topics are the same. And so I don't want to, you know, I rather work with people. But more than that, I also realize that our values are the same. So I think we started working together because I didn't know what Soka Gakkai International is when we started working together, but I saw the person who has the same values as I do, who's promoting those values, and maybe we, I don't know, maybe disagree on some issues, but at the core of what we're doing, we want to promote the same values. And at the UN, I think bringing that value discussion and that proposition by the faith-based organizations is so important that beyond the fact that I saw the need, I want to work with the faith-based organizations at the UN.
Thanks. If I can tell a little anecdote about Ivy real quick. So last year, the UN prepared what was called the Pact for the Future. And the NGOs were able to organize into these, they call them impact coalitions, get it? These impact coalitions, and Ivy was actually the leader of the Impact Coalition on Faith-Based Organizations. And in the initial rough draft of the Pact for the Future, there was no mention of the power of the faith-based community. So Ivy pulled together a group of people and was like, we need to add some language to that. And they came back with the second draft, and it was like, because faith-based or because religion has contributed to much of today's ills, or something like that. She's like, that's not what we were going for. And so went back and said, here's some better language, here's some better ways to describe this, and was eventually working as maybe the conductor of the choir in that case, to get some positive language in the Pact for the Future about the role of faith-based organizations in the world today. So well done. But you know, we talk about some of these things. We talk about the positive role of faith. We talk about human dignity and protecting human rights. I think Kiki was the one that brought up that, you know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has faith-based undertones to it. So I'm going to turn to Scott as the president of the NGO Committee on Freedom of Religion or Belief. How do religious organizations today contribute to defending human rights, protecting FORB, freedom of religion or belief, especially for vulnerable and minority communities? Or you can use this one.
Okay, thank you. Again, Scott Stearman, represent the Baptist Global Body at the United Nations, and like many of you in the room, I have a number of titles after my name, occasionally pastor, representative. Today, my favorite title is Advisory Board for Forum of Faith. Didn't I do a great job? I mean, this is just, wow. I'm so impressed with myself, which you know, this beautiful thing is reflected glory, right? I did absolutely almost less than zero, but I'm so grateful for this extraordinary event, and I will forever put this on my resume. This has been I've worked with Ryan, I guess, 5-ish years or longer, and it's a privilege for me to be sitting beside him. He has done such a wonderful job in his role. He represents not just his own faith community, but I think he represents, if I can say it this way, Jesus, and his own, it's just his demeanor, manner of being, the way he treats others, and he is truly an inspiration. And I'm very grateful to have him on the Bureau, More UN Speak. The Bureau is the executive committee for the Committee of Freedom of Religion or Belief. Let me give you an example, just a concrete example that I think gets at the question that Ryan, softball question, I guess Ryan threw at me. So last week, there was a high-level conference on Myanmar and the crisis for the Rohingyas and other minorities that's happening. If you know what's happening in Burma, as many people still call it, or Myanmar, you know there is a travesty of both a clash of ethnicities, but it's particularly a crisis of religion in the sense that the Muslim community, the Rakhine State of Burma, as of 10 years ago, were the recipients of a genocidal attacks from the military government, or at that point, the burgeoning democracy. But then 2 years ago, there was a coup that took place, and so the military government took complete control and had been bombing churches and civilian events, and you may have just seen the news. They even sent in some sort of military destructive balloons or something to a Buddhist event that just happened the other night, killing something like 40 people. So this is going on again, and so the UN rightly, and some would say finally, realized that this needed to be addressed in a high-level, all-day conference. It was a great meeting, and a lot of agreement on the problem, a lot of agreement on potential solutions if we could get our act together. It was a wonderful meeting. And then following that, there was a day that I work with a coalition group of Burmese Americans, and we put a major event that addressed how women and minorities are particularly affected by this. We had a great group and a great support from UN Women, by the way, for this event. All of this ultimately might lead to, of course, a safer and better world for the people of Myanmar to be able to live in their communities and worship. There are 2 million Baptists in Burma. I bet you would lose that on trivia, wouldn't you? But in the northern states of the Chin State and the Shan State, there are it's mostly Christian community, and they have been under extraordinary pressure, the kind that the Rohingya Muslim minority was, 10 years ago. So this work that we're doing, motivated by our faith that all people everywhere should be able to worship in freedom and security, believe or not believe according to their conscience. That work is done by mostly religious actors who believe deeply and personally about this work. One final just illustration that relates to how I think religious communities work. It's just last week again. On Wednesday, the Quaker representative to the United Nations, Quaker, it's not a group you hear a lot about, small group, but they organized an event at the Church Center, which is across the street from the UN, an event with the National Unity Government of Myanmar, of Burma. And so these are it's basically the government of exile. And so this is put together, organized, promoted by our Quaker brother and sisters. Just an illustration of some of the work that happens in the faith community, protecting, helping, promoting religious freedom.
Interesting. Thank you. Now, I'm going to ask you to elaborate a little bit more, and building off of what Scott said. He said last week there was a meeting and there was a lot of agreement on the problem, which we often have. We get into a room and we're like, yes, we agree this is a problem. And then we have myriad different ways on what we think the solution to the problem is, but we can all agree on the problem. So, Felipe, building on what Scott said, how have you seen these faith communities come together to solve these problems?
Are you saying that the UN just talks and doesn't do anything? Something that we are proud of is, along those lines, that meeting was on the 30th, right, on Tuesday, last Tuesday. It was the 7th high-level meeting that my office supported for participation and stakeholder engagement. And what we have been advocating is, what is unique now, is that not only faith-based, but civil society at large is invited to the table to be part as panelists and as active interlocutors. That didn't happen before. Part of my office is called the Non-Governmental Liaison Service, and its sole purpose is to negotiate the participation and the voices of civil society within the UN high-level meetings. And now it's not more just come and warm the chair and that's it. Is now we want you to participate. So we are asked to collect statements, to identify speakers, and to find actors that can participate actively and passively. How faith-based engagement happens, over 60% of the active CSOs at the UN are faith-based.
CSO, civil society.
Civil society organizations, including NGOs, academic institutions. We also invite the private sector because they were orphaned. No one was caring for them, so our office decided, okay, let's invite Microsoft. We had an AI, let me give you some numbers, last week, the week of the GA, sorry. We had a high-level meeting on AI governance, artificial intelligence, and the future of governance, right? 23 speakers were member states, 17 speakers were civil society. And that is a negotiation with the current President of the General Assembly. She's very keen towards including those voices. So it's fantastic to see that there's space. What do we do that space is then what Ryan says, who carries on the mantle and does the implementation? Traditional civil society. Those are the ones who on the ground carry on the work. So policymakers will talk a lot, and then they may allocate different resources depending on what member state we're talking about. Reality is that the implementers will be civil society, grassroots groups, and people who care. And most of them are, as I said, 60% of those active at the UN are faith-based or faith-inspired. So how does that work? It works in that we need to protect that space. We need to ensure that we have a civic space within the UN system. We also advocate in my office for the protection against retaliation by member states towards voices in the Rohingya, but other spaces where faith communities are targeted. We try to find ways so that we can negotiate that in the modalities of the participation, the resolution, even the house-country agreements, we have protection mechanisms so that if they participate in coordination with our colleagues in the Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights, we find ways to ensure that the language protects those participants and their families back home, and we can find ways so that they can safely say what they need to or what they have to without feeling, oh my goodness, what's going to happen with my family back in Spain, my country, or somewhere else. So that invitation comes with a risk in many cases. The UN is also trying to mitigate that risk and ensure that there's a protection so that those who participate can do it safely. We talk about women's issues, for example, and maternal health and women's health. It is a controversial issue, but we find that when we were with those communities, they are really the implementers of the solutions on the ground. We can dictate, but I think that the Watchtower in, not Jehovah's Witnesses, but the Watchtower in New York of the UN is not the best place to really implement. We may guide, but only if we listen to what is going on the ground. Those actors that report usually are faith-based. We get the reports, we get the information. We may make some decisions because it's decided that the UN is headquartered in New York City. Great city, I love it. 17 years here, and I cannot complain. But then we had to translate that into action on the ground. And that, unfortunately, the UN doesn't have the means, the resources, or the capacity to do it. It is you, as civil society organizations, it is you as NGOs, academic institutions, private sector, private citizens who will carry on the work. So in our case, is listening, inviting to the conversation those who already spoke from the ground at the New York meetings, and then translate, and then hope that people will continue with the work. The Pact for the Future is one of the examples. Intergovernmentally negotiated, but implemented by other actors. So thanks to you, the UN survives, because if it were not for you, very few people will continue doing the work of the UN, and the UN would just be doing just talk and nothing more.
The UN doesn't do just talk. That was the whole point of my original thing, was that's the criticism, but we're trying to dispel that criticism. So there we go. But you did mention a couple of these issues. You mentioned like women's health and some other things that are traditionally seen as more secular topics, right? Up to this point, we've discussed like freedom of religion or belief. That's a space for faith-based actors. But we also have some of these secular topics. And one could analyze them from the purely secular side. But what role can faith communities play in advancing these traditionally secular issues as well? And how can they collaborate with UN agencies working on the Sustainable Development Goals? So we'll ask this question of first Kiki and then Ivy.
Thank you, Ryan. I was excited when I saw this question. I'm very passionate about women's health and sexual and reproductive health and rights. As Ryan said when he introduced me, I'm a public health physician by training. I work with the United Nations Population Fund. Don't ask me why the F is before the P. That's a topic for another day. But we're also the Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency of the UN. And we have three main goals, right? We want to end preventable maternal death. So we want a world where no woman dies giving birth, right? We also want to end gender-based violence and other harmful practices, such as female genital mutilation, teenage pregnancy, early forced and child marriage, comorbidities like obstetric fistula. We want to make sure those things that we know do not need to happen aren't happening anymore. And then we want to ensure that every pregnancy is actually one that is desired, by ensuring that women and young people have access to choices and autonomy to be able to control their fertility. And so these are some of the broad things we do, but we also work on population issues. So let me give a little bit of a history, just a very quick history. Prior to 1994, the understanding of population, governments were very concerned about population and demography, and they looked at it as an issue of national security. However, what that led to were very stringent population policies that ultimately constrained the rights of women and girls. We had things like forced sterilization camps in India, where women were being sterilized against their will. Now, all of this activated feminists and women's movements across the world, which culminated in a Cairo conference, a conference in Egypt in 1994, where following series of negotiations and dialogue across 174 countries, there came about a shift in an understanding of population where it's not about numbers, but it's about human rights. It's about the rights of women and the rights of girls, and that's something that we continue to try to safeguard. Now, since this happened, we've seen that maternal death, preventable maternal death, has dropped by over 50%, right? Because now we have the impetus, we have the policies to work on these issues. Where do faith actors come in? They come in at every single level. They come in at the global level in the normative discourse. Ivy talked about the Commission on the Status of Women. Ahead of that, or shortly after that, we have the Commission on Population and Development that takes place in April. Here, countries come together to deliberate on population policies. A lot of them are still linked to reproductive choice, reproductive rights, and faith actors advocate together with secular civil society so that we have progressive policies that actually help the most vulnerable women and girls in grassroots communities on the ground who never get to come to New York or walk through the hallowed halls of the UN and really advocate for themselves. So this is something that happens. I touched a little bit on, and Felipe was talking about it, it's one thing to have policies and resolutions that can then be translated into national population policies. It's another thing to have implementation on the ground. And for issues like maternal health and family planning, implementation has to do with the provision of services, accessible quality health services in the hardest to reach areas. And who are the people that provide the bulk of these services? It's faith actors, it's religious institutions, it's religious hospitals. A lot of our partners, our service providers, our implementing partners on the ground as UNFPA are faith actors. UNFPA, where the funds and programs, so Felipe is in the secretariat, the big guys, we're the ones on the ground. We have 150 country offices across the world. And in each of these country offices, I was going through the data, we have a program of work with faith actors and religious actors across our 150 countries because they're the ones who are in the community. I just got a message from my focal point because I coordinate this, for UNFPA. I got a message from my focal point in Zambia. She just concluded an activation with the Anglican bishops in Zambia around preventing child marriage. And they have a program of work, they have a policy that they're pushing across the churches to really counsel families not to marry off their children under the age of 18, their girl children, to keep those girls in school, to provide them with menstrual hygiene products. And when a bishop tells you to do something, you do it, right? So it's making a huge difference, so much more effective than if Kiki from New York comes into Zambia and starts telling people what to do. Who am I? But if your local bishop is telling you these things are not right, you're undermining the rights of this girl who can be the salvation of your family if you give her a quality education. So it's essential that we collaborate with faith actors, and we've seen tremendous success when we, with humility, listen to the guidance from the ground and collaborate effectively to deliver programs, services, and to advocate for the rights of women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you. I think she deserves a round of applause for that. Ivy, what can you add?
Okay. So I was thinking about this, and actually I thought I'd share a little bit of history of SGI so that it kind of makes sense how faith matters, and in the work of the UNY, it was easy for SGI to decide to support the UN. And it was built by educators during World War II, or even pre-World War II. And I think that it was, and it was founded by educators in Japan. And of course, Japan had 2 bombs, right, dropped on them during World War II. And they were committed, the leaders at the time, the first 2 presidents said, never again. Like, we do not want another nuclear weapon ever to inflict such pain and destruction. Anyway, so that was pretty clear for us. And because of that, so our organization is global. And among the 10 or so millions, it's pretty clear that disarmament is it's all across. And everybody knows that, we don't want arms, to every single member. And I think it's because it's so embedded in our SGI tradition that we absolutely. And so the power of the constituency that we impact. But then to bring that to, because it's such a natural, the UN's mandate and the, for peace is so clearly connected. And so for us, it was just very natural to work with the UN, but the impact that we have, not on just that, but then we also have awareness raising around different topics, could be on sustainability or that's a popular one. How to live, because I'm thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals, and there are campaigns happening in India and Malaysia and other countries, and they're educating the membership. The local organization is deciding to take that up, and so. Although the SDGs is not talked about so much in the United States, but in some other countries it's actually quite popular, and they're all wearing their little pins, and they can tell you what the 16 goals are. And that's something that even within oh my gosh, you know why I said 16? Does someone know what the 16th one is?
Yeah. Inclusive institutions.
Yes, so it's always on my mind. But that's why to me it was 16. But the 17 is actually very critical. It's all around partnerships. And maybe that's 2 things of the SDGs you'll remember from today. But I'll end. No, thank you. I appreciate that.
So we just have a couple minutes left. So I'm going to ask Ifat and Scott one last question. For those in our audience today, and there are a few of my fellow UNists, but for those who may not work directly with the UN but care deeply about peace and human dignity, what are some practical ways local faith communities can support international advocacy efforts? Let's start with you, Ifat.
I'm stealing the microphone mainly because I have a family emergency and a very hard stop in 3 minutes. My son, but... So, and actually easy because Kiki took half of my answer anyway, because she demonstrated how UN offices are so widespread, and you spoke of UNFPA, but I met this morning actually with a colleague from the Department of Communications, and they have different offices in different places, so there are offices doing implementation work everywhere. And so finding an office, be it in New York, be it in Mozambique, be it anywhere else, and helping your communities and our communities finding those offices and working with them understanding what their work is, understanding what their goals are, and especially understanding what implementation projects they have is super critical. It's helpful, as you heard here, to the UN and to the goals of our organizations, and it's very easy and local. And there are many, many offices working on a lot of different topics, and so that's one way. The other thing I want to say, though, is the UN, and some of you are, some of you aren't, but the UN kind of has two different structures. One is very much the offices, the organizations, UNFPA, ILO, and others. The other is the member states. So a lot of my work with the Jewish communities around the world is educating them, in a sense, about what the UN is and how it works, and helping them advocate for themselves within their state, their community. So the people at the UN who represent member states, I mean, they get their instructions, they get their paths, their direction from their governments, their ministries of foreign affairs, etc. And so working and finding the people working on those issues within their local government, within their local Ministry of Foreign Affairs or others, Ministry of Justice sometimes, and working and advocating with them, telling them we actually understand these topics, and we want you to take into consideration our positions and kind of the faith aspects of this when you're doing negotiations, when you're giving directions, is also super important, and I think not done enough by the faith-based organizations locally. And with that, I apologize and thank you.
Thank you, Ifat.
I'll make this quick. I have a really pointed and I think an important message for our religious communities everywhere, local or global, and that is put your money where your mouth is. We all religious traditions love to talk about making the world a better place. We want to change the world. We want to transform human lives for the better. That's what we're all about. But, you know, I can speak to my own community, Baptist community. You know, how much money have we invested in this kind of work? Take a look at my salary and you'll know it's really not much. But I, at the same time, I want to pay a huge compliment. First to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They have a beautiful office. I won't tell the address because I'll be dropping by, but it's one that's easy to remember on Broadway. They're very generous with the facility. And I want to call out my friend Carl, who's here with us from the Baha'i community. The Baha'i community has this extraordinary and beautiful facility right next to the UN campus. And the great thing about the Baha'i space is that they allow you to use it and they won't let you pay for it. Now, that's the best kind of deal in the world. That's the kind of thing we need, those sort of resources and that kind of commitment and that kind of generosity.
Thank you so much. So I think you can all agree with me that these are some of the best talkers that I know. And I want to thank Ifat, who had to leave, Ivy, Scott, Dr. Kiki, and Felipe one more time for their participation today. Thank you so much. And that's it for the Forum on Faith. So thank you for your participation. We'll see you next year at NYU. Thank you so much for coming.